Okay, so welcome to our session. My name is Maria Rouse. I'm Senior Global Product Manager for Industrial Cybersecurity here at Rockwell Automation. We're going to spend the next 50 minutes or so talking about designing a robust cybersecurity strategy for your OT environment. So we've got a number of different topics to cover today around, how we're going to base our strategy. So think about what is NIST Cybersecurity Framework and how this can help us when it comes to defining our strategy. And then once we've got a basic understanding, how do I leverage the framework? How do I put that to good use? What can I do? And what some tips and tricks may well be. And then thinking about how do I build my business case? We all want to strive to make improvements, improve our cyber posture, improve our resiliency, but we need funds to do that. And this is where sometimes we might struggle. So let's think about how we can build that business case. Once we've built our business case, how can we operationalize the plan? So how do we put it into effect? What's the right way to do that and the priority? Something that's really important as well is how do we demonstrate those results? So we've done something, how do we show its success? How do we show our board and our investors that we've made good with the funds that they've provided us? And then finally, we know that you can't do this by yourselves. How do you find a partner that's going to help you when it comes to executing your strategy? So some of the things that we need to think about when it comes to NIST is, what is it? What is the NIST Cybersecurity Framework? So, NIST CSF was really developed by the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, and it's really there to help organizations of different sizes, of different industries, whether it's public or private, but really help operations manage and reduce their cyber risk. And it operates in a way that's really enables people to communicate in a standard manner. So people that are not necessarily cyber experts and practitioners can understand how to go about doing something, how to organize their efforts, how to do this in a structured manner following best practices. Because as you're taking your requirements to your board and asking for your funds, not everybody on your board is going to be a cyber expert, and they won't necessarily want to speak in traditional cyber speak. So being able to communicate on a level that goes across your entire range of personas that you're talking to is really going to help you get across your message and how you're communicating. So one of the things that that NIST does is focuses on business outcomes rather than saying thou shalt must do something. So when it comes to trying to drive your spend and what you're focusing on, knowing your business outcomes and being able to correlate everything towards that is really going to help you when it comes to driving your investments. So the NIST really consists of a number of different categories and subcategories. And again, they are outcome driven because it really will help you prescribe what you need to do to meet your outcomes. So not being technology focused, oh, I need to implement a certain technology to do something, but I want to improve my resiliency. I want to be able to recover from an incident in a shorter period of time that meets my operational requirements. It's going to help you do that and describe the ways that you can do that and the language to help you do that. It also allows for flexibility and be adaptive and have that risk-based approach to cyber. So understanding what your risks are they acceptable and tolerable for you? And if they're not, then enabling you to prioritize and focus on those specific risks. So it really is a way to follow industry best practices, a way to be able to communicate effectively to your board and your investors as to, I need to start doing these things to help us become a more cyber secure organization, which is going to help us when it comes to profitability, operational efficiency, meeting our customer demands and requirements, all of the stereotypical outcomes that we have when it comes to that OT environment. So as we look to what the NIST framework looks like, what does it consist of? It's really built out of 6 core functions that are really there to help as we look through the process, so to say, of what's happening in the organization and when it comes to cybersecurity, how we can look at each of those different outcomes. So on the recent addition to the NIST framework was the govern function. And govern is really important because it's going to help to look at how an organization is creating, defining, maintaining, and managing their risk management strategy. So it's the underlying core, the underlying function to how an organization operates when it comes to security and maintaining the security of their environment. The next we have is the identify function. And I would say, along with govern, is one of the most important and fundamental functions that you can have. If you don't understand what you have in place today, and this is something that we always say, if I don't know what's there, how can I protect it? So being able to identify, your not just your business context, but what resources, what assets do I have? What are the risks associated with those, the vulnerabilities? I need to know those so I can start to really define my plan. As you're defining your plan and you're moving, throughout the phase and throughout the cycle, how do I protect those? What do I implement? What are the safeguard measures? What are the controls I can implement to maintain what I have? How can I maintain that so I can continue to produce, continue to meet my customers' requirements? The next thing that we look at is the whole detect function. So how do I know what's going on? What's happening in my environment? How can I raise a visibility to that? So how can I see that? So being able to detect an event when it's occurring is going to be critical to many organizations, not only for maintaining their production, but also if I had to be compliant with a particular standard or legislation or law, I need to be able to detect so I can discover and report. So this is a critical element to think about. We all need to be able to respond to an incident when it happens. What are those actions that I'm going to take? How can I prescribe those actions? So the respond function is really going to help us respond to an incident when it occurs. And then we need to be able to recover in the shortest period of time to get back up and operational again. So what are those plans that I need to help me recover? How do I continue to improve on those plans? How do I maintain resiliency and recover after an incident occurs? So as we look to the different pillars in a little bit more detail, so, the govern pillar or core function is really going to help the organization establish the processes and the procedures to manage their cybersecurity risk. So being able to understand and specify the needs of your organization is going to be key to driving your business case and defining your strategy going forward. So think about how we can develop a tailored cybersecurity risk strategy. No two organizations are the same. Everybody operates differently. They have different requirements, different outcomes, and different needs. So you need to have that adaptive risk strategy to really help you meet your business outcomes. from the governance perspective, think about how we can start to establish and define those risk management policies. What is critical to you? What is critical to your environment? And we have to know that to be able to start to create these specific policies. Once we do have something in place, there needs to be a way to communicate across the organization. There is no point having specific policies and procedures in place if they haven't been communicated, and we have to be able to do that effectively. So the way we can leverage NIST is to really help us communicate in the terms and languages that everybody, all of the different personas that are going to interact with that policy in a way that we all understand. Another area that Govern is really going to help us is to think about supply chain and supply chain risk. As an organization, we don't operate independently. There are many other organizations, suppliers, partners that we operate with on a daily basis. And supply chain risk is something that we need to understand and be able to establish and maintain and monitor that. How are we going to act? What's going to happen if one of our suppliers that's connected to our OT plant, our infrastructure, is affected by a cyber incident? What are we going to do in that case? How do we ensure that we disconnect from them? How do we ensure that the products that they're supplying us are free from vulnerabilities? So we need to be able to start to define how we manage supply chain. This is something that is going to be really important in the future as we think to some of the new regulations that are coming out in different parts of the world. If we think about Europe, the European Union, and the establishment of the NIS2 directive, supply chain management is a core part of the NIS2 directive. If you are supplying product or you're building machines and supplying them into EU, you are a significant part of the supply chain. You are going to have requirements. So, leveraging NIST as part of your strategy to build your cybersecurity plan, then it's going to help you when it comes to other regulations that you may not work with on a day-to-day basis today, but you are likely to going to have to work with in the future. So another thing about the govern core function is, how to continue from a maintenance perspective, that that oversight and having those checkpoints in place. People talk about cybersecurity as a journey. For me, it's not a journey. It's ongoing. It's continually. It's cyclic. We need to be able to continuously assess, verify where we are with those and having those checkpoints in place. And the govern function is really going to allow us to do that in a structured manner. So as you look to the next pillar, the next function, identify. So identifying the organization's risks, so making sure that the current risks are understood, and then establishing where you need to go. Where do I want to be today? Or where am I today? Where do I want to be in the next 1, 3, 5 years? So being able to identify critical business processes and assets. So from a physical asset to a people asset, because people are a critical part of your cybersecurity posture. So know what you have, know what you need to protect is going to be one of the key elements of the identify function. We also need to think about how do we maintain our inventories. Some of the things that we see as an organization that are supporting customers when it comes to asset inventory, asset and vulnerability management is, quite often we'll ask for, so what do you have as asset inventory? Do you have a list of all the devices that are deployed in your environment? Can you tell me who the asset owner is? Who's responsible for maintaining that asset? Who is responsible for updating that? Quite often there might be a list of rudimental assets, but the the contextualization around them is not there. So if there was an event, something that happens and an asset is compromised, you need to know who's responsible for that asset. So think about, how are you going to maintain those assets? How are you going to maintain that inventory and make sure that it's up to date? And the identify pillar is going to help you do that. Looking at risk and knowing what your most critical risks and assets are is something that is an important part of the identify pillar. And knowing, potentially how external threats can affect your most critical assets. So being able to establish, what are my crown jewels, what are my most critical assets, and have a plan around how they're going to be protected and maintained. And make sure that everything that you're doing and defining is really aligned with the organization's overall security objectives that we should be defining as part of the govern function. And when we define goals, make sure that they are smart, make sure that they are realistic and they are achievable, so that we don't start to have, pie in the sky type of goals and assets. So what do we know once we've established what assets we have in place? We need to be able to protect those. There are many ways that we can start to protect our assets. And this is where, everybody that loves technology starts to get really excited about, oh, I can start to implement this new technology and I can start to, do these things, implement these controls. So it's really important that we understand, what those assets are, the criticality and, the different types of measures that we can put in place, but make sure we understand what are we going to do with those measures. One of the outcomes that are covered by this function, is to think about things like identity management, authentication and access control. So who is accessing the environment? How do we authenticate who they are? What do they have access to? Is really, really critical when it comes to, securing your infrastructure. Awareness and training. So, we as humans are, quite often the worst culprits when it comes to vulnerabilities in an environment and not being able to operate in a cyber secure manner. So making sure that we are conducting regular training that is specific to the OT needs. It's great that many organizations will operate cyber training when it comes to their enterprise and how they secure their enterprise environment and how people act with their corporate laptops, and don't open these emails, you don't click on spurious links. But what does it mean when it comes to OT context? So we need to make sure that our training is really aligned with the OT, with the industrial automation space. Make sure that we educate people on recognizing threats and anomalous behavior and being able to report that to someone somewhere, and who we're reporting to really knows what it means if a threat is reported to them and what are they going to do. Making sure that we're aligning the skills of the different personas interacting with security requirements. So this is something that is really important. There's no point skilling up somebody if it's skills that they're not going to use to support your ongoing cyber behaviors. We need to think about, device security. How are we securing those devices? Thinking about, device configuration. Oftentimes we're going in and conducting assessment and we're seeing from a device perspective that it still has out of the box configuration. Fundamental no, we need to make sure that we've got these things defined in our policy and procedure. Change control processes are key. you can't have people making changes to an environment and it's not documented and captured. So these things need to be considered as part of our protect function, and enabling login as well so that you can monitor change. Something we need to think about as well is that data protection. So, how we're making sure that as data transfers between different parts of our environment, that it is protected in transit. This is another key part of NIST 2. So you start to see that there's correlation between the NIST framework and regulation and potential law in other regions, making sure that data is encrypted in transit. Integrity is obviously important. So you're maintaining your data integrity throughout its process and making sure we're leveraging secure protocols in the environment. From a software perspective, maintaining the latest operating system and system patches, it does sound very simple in your enterprise space. When it comes to industrial control system, absolutely not. We've got to think about compatibility. Can I upgrade this OS? Is it going to break my application software? How do I manage all of this complexity in my space? But think about how do we work with and manage end-of-life legacy systems, which is one of the biggest issues that we see today. And then having a backup strategy. Oftentimes a backup will be implemented. Yeah, I've got my backup software installed. I'm backing up on a weekly basis. Then when we start to ask questions, if we're conducting a risk assessment, it's like, have you restored your backup? When was the last time you restored and validated that your backup has functioned correctly? And this is when people start to realize that actually we haven't done that in a while. We need to build this into our policy from a backup perspective. So many things that we can think about when it comes to having those protect measures in place. When we look to detect, knowing that something is happening or has happened, there's anomalous behaviors going on, there's somebody in our environment, we need to know about that. We need to be able to identify the occurrence of a cyber event. So looking to monitor your networks and assets continuously is critical to that. Understanding indicators of compromise, anomalous behavior, but also how do we behave with that ourselves when we start to get that information. It's fantastic we start to implement technology to do this for us, but we need to make sure, going back to the training, that we've trained the people to understand what they've seen and how do they act on it. So being able to analyze the impact of what we've discovered, and how do we start to remediate based on that information. So making sure that the right people know what they're doing, what they've seen, and how they can respond to those incidents once we've established them. So when we come to respond and recover, how do we act when there has been an incident? So this particular function is really going to help us when it comes to incident response readiness. I've created my incident response plan. It's documented. I've shared that. Fantastic. Okay, but how do you then operate that? How is it operationalized? How do you test that? There's no point having a response plan if no one's tried it and tested it. So, how do we conduct those tabletop exercises to establish our readiness? When it comes to reporting and, regulations are going to tell us that we need to report within a certain time frame, that's something that we can build into our strategy. Being able to conduct root cause analysis is going to be key to meeting some regulation requirements. Being able to communicate and establish those incident priorities, making sure all of the stakeholders are aligned and aware of their responsibilities. Think about how you're going to gather the data to conduct your root cause analysis. So what are those protocols for gathering evidence? how do we maintain our data integrity, and then learning from what's happened, leveraging insights. We all need to learn from our behaviors, what we've done, what's happened, as we strive to improve and become better and more secure in the future. So, many different topics that we need to think about from that response function, and stakeholder communication is key. It's no good that your cyber team has created your incident response plan if they haven't communicated it to the people that operate in the production environment. And then, finally, recover. How do we get back to where we were? So what we've defined in our policies when it comes to our backup is going to play a key function in here, but making sure that people know what they're doing as well on that responsibility matrix, make sure that people know what they're doing from both an internal and external procedure. Am I going to have to bring in a partner or a vendor to help me recover? And if so, do they know what they need to do that? So making sure that we, not only have our recovery plan, but know how we're going to execute on that in the future. If we are down for a cyber incident, then, the key stakeholders that are running the business are going to know, when are we going to be back up and running? And we need to make sure that we're back up and running so we can continue to produce and meet our customer demands. So this is a really critical function of the NIST framework. But at the end of the day, right, what does this mean to me? How can I leverage these best practices and behaviors to help me write my business plan, to help me create my strategy? If I'm defining my strategy and going to my board to asking for the funds, we all need to write business cases at some time in our job roles. I have to do that if I'm trying to bring a new service to market, and I have a structured way of doing that. But is there a structured way today for a cyber team to write their business plan? Possibly not, which is why leveraging NIST and these best practices can really help us communicate in that common language, have that structured approach to creating a strategy and a business plan. If we can have structure behind it, we can easily portray our requirements for requesting that budget to implement some of the controls that we know that we need to implement now, to conduct our assessment, to understand where we are, to put some of the mitigation strategies in place. So, how do I implement? What do I do next? I know I need to do something. I've conducted my risk assessment. I have categorized my critical assets and prioritized the things I need to do. So how do I go about doing that? What do I do to implement that? So we need to have clear objectives and scope. So using the framework and categorizing the different things that we need to do within those different core functions, the different within those 6 pillars, is really going to help us define our clear and structured approach. Set goals and objectives. Not everything can be done at once. We can't do all of the different things that we need to do to secure environments in the first 12 months of our strategy. It is not feasible. We need to be realistic. So make sure that the goals that we are setting really are aligning with the overall, the company's overall strategies and objectives. Make sure that we clearly define what is in scope when it comes to the different users, the data that we have, the different systems, the different applications. We can focus on critical parts of our plant first, as opposed to looking across the whole picture. Make sure that you are always engaging with leadership to establish buy-in and commitment. You're not going to be able to do this on your own. If we're invested in cyber, in the different measures to protect, we're going to have funds to do that. And we're going to have to make sure that we've got leadership buy-in to get those funds. And one of the reasons, that we ourselves leverage NIST today when it comes to how we define our strategy and how we're defining our services strategy is it's well recognized globally, and it is simple, concise, built on best practices, that is understandable by different personas. We can see that according to some of the the report and analyst data out there, many organizations are using NIST for their overall OT security strategies. When we talk about goals, though, everybody's goals and objectives are different, but you need to work out what is right for you and make sure you articulate those. So, typical goals: protecting critical infrastructure, and that's critical infrastructure as a whole, but what's critical to you and to your operating environment. Being able to detect and respond to threats is absolutely key. Ensuring compliance. If you're a regulated industry, you're going to have to ensure compliance, and your OT strategy can help you secure compliance. Things that we see quite often: securing legacy systems. Not everybody can have the budget to migrate their systems, so we need to secure them throughout that process. So how do we understand what we've got, where we want to be, what our risks and threats are related to our install base? And to do that, we need to conduct an assessment. There are many assessments that we can conduct across our control system, across our base. And one of the things that we really want to, or I'd love to stress as well, is you could have lots of ideas of what you want to do from an assessment perspective, but understand what your budget is and make sure that the assessment that you're choosing is going to meet what your outcomes are, as well as your budget. There's no point asking for a risk assessment, a cybersecurity risk assessment that's going to give you your quantifiable risk and your mitigating risk post remediation if you don't have the budget to do that. If you're not a regulated industry and you don't need to do compliance, then you don't necessarily need to be conducting gap assessments against standards and frameworks. If you're starting out on your cyber journey, then you could start with a less costly type of assessment and focus on your vulnerabilities that you have, and start to do that prioritization yourselves based on those vulnerabilities. But think about, how do we identify our assets, determine what needs to be protected? So your asset, your devices, your data, your software, these are all things that we need to collect when it comes to identifying assets, as well as people. Look at the vulnerabilities. So identify the vulnerabilities, understand the likelihood of exploitation, and how that can impact your business and your operation. Assess the threats that you have, not just external threats, not just those threat actors that may be coming into your environment, but also your internal threats as well, from both a cyber perspective and even a physical perspective. And your internal threats can also include your people and how they're interacting with the environment. So many different assessments that you can do, and depending on where you are in your cycle and your maturity and your maturity level is going to really define the type of assessment you're going to want to conduct. So anything from vulnerability assessment right through to a fully quantifiable risk assessment, through to testing your controls with penetration testing once you've gone through this assess and implement cycle. So many different assessments that are only going to be defined by you, your use cases, and your outcomes and what you're trying to achieve. Now, when we're conducting assessments, one of the gaps that we see oftentimes is around policies and procedures and specific OT cybersecurity policies and procedures. So we know today that our OT environments have completely different and unique requirements from your traditional IT or enterprise space. Industrial control system, the OT, is going to be producing product, delivering a service. So every time we're thinking about producing, its availability that is key for us as producers. So availability is going to be the fundamental priority. So making sure that you have policy and procedures that meet operating requirements is fundamental to adoption and adhering to the policies and procedures. There's no point having policies and procedures that don't work for an OT environment because they won't be adopted, they won't be adhered to, and then you're putting yourself back at risk. So OT, we know, has high productivity demands. We talk about digital transformation all of the time. So being able to have a policy that defines your security requirements that meet not only your production, but also your digital transformation. Think about the evolving technologies that we have today and smart devices. And as we start to connect those, they start to introduce risk and increasing your attack surface. So what is your policy on how you're implementing smart devices? But when you look to create and write your policies, it needs to come from senior leadership. There needs to be that buy-in from a leadership perspective. Ensure that it meets the management's acceptable level of risk. Know what your risk tolerance is. And then think about how to set the OT cyber objectives, and then start to outline those principles for mitigating and reducing the risk where possible. So lots of things to think about, but having a specific OT cyber policy is a great way to start to ensure adoption and buy-in. Now, us people, us employees really are crucial to cyber and maintaining in any organization. We are an intrinsic part of every organization. So we need to have specific OT focused cybersecurity training and drive that awareness to make sure that people are operating themselves with cyber in mind. We are not doing the common mistakes of poor password hygiene, sharing passwords. We've been to sites and passwords are on post-it notes stuck to screens. These types of behaviours are no longer acceptable. So we need to ensure that our policy and procedures are driving our password policies, but they are being adhered to. So we need to train people and ensure that they're aware of the actions that they're taking, and what they're doing is really affecting the overall cyber effectiveness of a plant, as an example. What we do know from some of our partners that we're working with and looking at some of the latest reports that they're providing, 3 types of main driving factors for some of the incidents that were seen last year. We all know ransomware is one of those main drivers. But operational errors, people errors are some of the main contributing factors to some of the threats and issues that we've seen within the OT space. So we come to implementing controls and countermeasures, and this is where it gets exciting when it comes to technology, and we can start to go and look at those different technologies that are out there, the different tools that we can use as controls and countermeasures. And everybody gets excited when there's new technology introduced, and I can implement this piece of technology because it's going to do these things for me. But having the right tools is imperative, and helping to define what tools you're going to use is really dependent on your use cases and outcomes. And I'm going to implement this, what can I do with it? How am I going to maintain and manage this once it's deployed? So, if we take one of the tools that people are implementing all the time, and I know I've referred to it earlier on in the deck, but monitoring your network and the traffic and behaviors in your network, and you go and implement intrusion detection, for example. Once you start to implement your IDS, you're going to start to receive alerts and information, and being able to understand and establish that, what you're going to do with those alerts, how am I going to manage these, what do they even mean? If you don't have the right people in place and the resources, or the time to train and educate the resources and act on those alerts, then it's not really going to be very effective in securing your environment. So, don't get excited by a technology by itself, but understand how it's going to work for you. Know what your outcomes are and really be guided by those outcomes and use cases as to what technology that you implement. If you think about implementing an IDMZ, so that industrial demilitarized zone, if it hasn't been designed according to your requirements and allows you to communicate the data sets that need to be communicated via the IDMZ up into your enterprise layer, and it's either going to leave you vulnerable, or it's going to be a complete block so people can't communicate, and they start to bypass and find ways to go around it. So create your use cases, understand your requirements, and make sure that they, what you're designing from a technology perspective meets those use cases and requirements. So, finally, compliance. If you're not regulated, you don't necessarily have to meet compliance, but if you've gone to the effort of implementing your own policies and procedures, then you want to be verifying yourself against those policies and procedures. So I appreciate that you can't be compliant against a framework. So as we're talking about NIST, you're not going to be compliant against NIST, but you're going to have your own strategy that you are going to want to check and measure against. So think about how you're going to measure against what you've implemented from a policies and procedures perspective. Think about how you can verify what you've done and what you've implemented. So who can help you do that? Is this something that you're able to do yourself with a subjective view on that? Or do you need that third party to give you that unbiased review? So measure where you are, measure your compliance if you need to, and think about how you can learn from what you're verifying from a compliance perspective. So how do I pay for all of this? A complete investment is going to be significant, and it's not a one and done thing as well. As I've already said, it's cyclic, it's ongoing. You're going to need to build into your annual operating expenses, your cybersecurity practices, measures, training, maintaining your environment. So you need to be able to build your business plan accordingly. So think about how you're going to do that. So let's start with, where are we today? This is our current position. I know my outcomes mean I want to be at this level of maturity in 3 years' time. So understand where you are today to where you need to be in the future. Define your problem statement. Make sure you've got the evidence to back up where you are today. What are your main risks? How do these then prevent us meeting our organizational outcomes, and make sure that there's alignment between the different stakeholders within the organization? Create your strategy to overcome all of these points. Think about the risk tolerance that you've already defined. Think about the different budget requirements, what that roadmap is going to look like. And then how will you show those improvements? How are you going to measure your success of your investment? Because when you go back next year to ask for additional funds, if what you've invested in hasn't made a change or an improvement, then it's going to be more difficult to get your funds for your second year of your program and strategy. So one of the things that is really important to do is to be able to describe why cyber is critical in today's OT environment. And when you're talking to your management, they don't want to talk in technical terms and speak the cyber for cyber language, but they will want to talk in terms that is that they're understanding. And yes, the NIST framework is going to allow us to do that with the the simple categorization, but also those outcomes. So when we talk today with measurable outcomes from an OT perspective, we want to enable production continuity. We want to be able to continue to produce the product that we're selling to make our business successful. We want to protect our intellectual property. We don't want people stealing our recipes. We don't want people to be able to replicate what we're producing so that they take our market share. Something that's really critical is maintaining brand integrity. Nobody is going to want to buy your product if they've read in the news about, you've had an incident and, potentially your recipes have changed. So how do you maintain your brand integrity and your customer intimacy? We all know about unplanned downtime. It's something that we talk about in industry all of the time, but you should be building into your downtime provisions that you may well have an incident from a cyber perspective that is going to take you out of production, because it's not an if, it's a when we look at some of the stats. One of the things that we need to think about is maintaining our production targets and our SLAs. So being able to show that if we were to be taken out by a cyber incident, the average period of downtime is X amount of weeks. What are we going to do in that period of time? So this is something we need to think about, as well as cost. The cost of a breach today is significant, and we see it going up year over year. So these are some of the terms that we can use when we're creating our business plan and trying to justify that return on investment. The purists out there will say that you can't have an ROI on cyber, but you can leverage the fundamental outcomes that we try to achieve every day and overcome every day in your language when you're creating your business case. So when you've written your business case, and I'm not going to share a number-based business case, I don't want this to be a math lesson for all of us, but when you've created your business case based on the facts of where you are today, where you want to be in the future, your risks and your gaps and the types of controls and remediation measures you want to put in place, and you've gone out and you've obtained your 3 quotes from your 3 different vendors and partners to give you your budget estimation, you're going to put that together and take it to your management and try and obtain those funds. So make sure that you are talking in the right language. Explain how the NIST framework can help you have that structured approach to your cybersecurity strategy. Talk in the right language. Do not take a technical conversation to your C-suite, to your board, because they're not going to want to talk about that and hear the language that you use today on a cyber basis, but talk about business value and how this is going to help you meet your overall business outcomes. Have the right people in the room. Don't differentiate. We need to have IT involved in that discussion around OT security. There are tools and techniques that we can bring from IT. We just need to adapt it. And if people don't feel included in these conversations, then they're not going to support your cause. So when you do go to IT to help you when it comes to implementing tools like multi-factor authentication that you as an automation engineer don't necessarily know about, they will need to help you. So they'll need to feel included to give you that support. Think about setting the right context. Why are we doing this? So the risks that we see, what's going on in industry today, the trends that we see on a daily basis, what you found during your assessment, and make sure you are factual. So be prepared for questions, But if you don't know the answers, be honest around it. I don't know what the answer to that is today, but I'm going to go and investigate and provide you that answer. So we can't all know everything, and we don't know what we don't know. So, there's no harm in not knowing all of the answers. And make sure you set the ask. What are you asking them to do for you? What do you need from them? When and when is it needed? So, we need to achieve compliance to this regulation by 2025, the end of 2025. These are the steps that need to be done. I need my investment here because I need to do this then. So make sure that you've got all that information captured for your audience. So plan the implementation. We can't do it all at once. So one of the ways to do this is to focus on the quick wins first. What's going to give me my biggest bang for my buck? What is the least amount of investment that's going to give me that biggest jump in my cyber hygiene, for example? So think about action plans and priorities. Use your assessment to get you there. Whoever is conducting your assessment should be able to tell you that if you implement these 3 changes, they're going to take you from this level to this level with this smallest amount of investment. So being able to categorize and invest on your quick wins is going to be key. Leverage your assessment to help you get there, and then align them with your business outcomes and map to these. One thing that we should all remember is, your assessment might give you, pages of vulnerabilities, and it might give you, a high CVSS score that, this is really critical. I need to do something now. But that's not always the case if you've got mitigating controls around them. So use a now, next, and never strategy. I know I've got this OS that needs patching, but it's completely isolated, so it's not interacting with anything, or whatever the mitigation circumstances are. I don't need to patch it tomorrow because I know it's going to break my application, which means I won't be able to run this part of my plant. So think about the risk involved. And then apply those countermeasures according to your risk profile, which you would have understood as part of your risk assessment. So what are my next steps? Because we've just gone through a lot. There's a lot to take into consideration, from understanding how NIST is going to help you with its core functions, to understanding your assets, your vulnerabilities, the risks and threats in your environment, your prioritization, what your critical parts of your manufacturing plant are, to the different controls and countermeasures that you're going to need to put in place to get you from your maturity level where you are today to where you need to be in the future. So you can't do it all yourself. You need to find somebody to consult with and guide you and support you on that journey. And we see the need when we are conducting assessments for organizations that they really need that prescriptive way of working to know what that now, next, and never strategy is. So we appreciate that cyber is changing. It's an ongoing activity. It's cyclic. The risks evolve. The threat actors become more challenging in the ways that they're operating. So we need to be, cyclic in the way that we're going about this. So find that partner that has proven experience and credentials in both cyber and your industry, because your industry is unique. Each and every industry is different and has their own unique requirements, whether that's compliance, regulation, and knowing that you need to have regulatory compliance. So make sure that that vendor, that partner, has that experience in your space, and challenge them for use cases. Ensure they've got demonstratable use cases. They have done this in this industry that shows that they know what they're talking about and how they know what they're doing to help protect you as an organization, and make sure that the use cases that they're prescribing, really resonate with your own. And your partner that you choose should be able to help you create your use cases And those use cases are not about verifying how well the technology works. It's how those use cases meet your business outcomes, because technology invariably works. So we need to be making sure that we are focusing on our needs and not the technology needs. So, we can help you with all of these different things that we've spoken about, from understanding NIST and the cybersecurity framework to what's happening in your industry and technology. So with Rockwell and Verve together hand in hand, we've got a very broad spectrum of different tools and technologies that we can help you. So knowing that we have expertise in industry and regulation, so how can the solution that we're providing you help meet your industry specifics and regulations? This is something that we can work with you on. Being able to help when it comes to specific OT cyber policy and procedures, so helping you define who has access to what is my incident response procedure, how am I going to conduct and go about my patch management strategy. These are all of the different things that we can help you when it comes to improving your cybersecurity program and creating that strategy. Thinking that I'm an enterprise organization, I've got many plants across many different countries. Having somebody with a global footprint that can support you in all of your different locations and being able to do that in a consistent and standardized manner is important. Bringing you those use cases, we as a player in automation for the last 120 plus years, we've got a lot of experience in industrial automation and securing that. So, we operate in a design for security manner. So we're able to help bring those different use cases and securing the environment to you. And helping you when it comes to understanding technology. These are all the different things that really define what a trusted partner is. Now, if you don't really know where to start and you need a little bit of help, then this QR code will take you to the rockwellautomation.com pages, where we have a workbook that can help you through building that business case for industrial cybersecurity. So you can scan the QR code. I know I laugh because it's not a necessarily good thing to scan QR codes, but from us, you can scan a QR code that will take you to the rock.com pages to help you download that workbook. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions in the chat that we've got a couple of minutes to answer, and if we don't have time, then please feel free to reach out and we'll see if we can answer your questions and topics offline.
Maria, I think we do have some questions for today. One question here for you. In addition to risk assessments, can you provide any other recommendations that companies can strategically deal with heavy technical debt? Ideally, we want to solve everything, but in reality, we only have finite resources.
Yeah, I think it's establishing yourselves. What are your critical assets? What are your crown jewels? And focusing on those critical areas first. So think about conducting a crown jewels assessment, establish what's important, and work on how you can then remediate, modernize, migrate those legacy assets that are critical to your environment. So asset management strategy is going to be key to that as part of your assessment journeys.
Couple more here, Maria, if you have some time. There's a couple questions, so I'll kind of loop these together. Is that there seems to be overlap between the NIST CSF framework, the CIS-CEC, and the IEC 62443. How do you think, from your perspective, where they should focus in, and with the overlap, how do you rectify which groups may be tackling each one of these different perspectives?
Yeah, and we see this all of the time, right? There's definitely correlation between the different standards and frameworks. So the way that we're quite often working with our customers is for an organization that needs to be regulated, then we're recommending and using today and assessing against, 62443, which is a standard, which you can comply against. And quite often the regulations that are mandatory are referring and built upon 62443. We see that with NIS2 today in EMEA. It's heavily built upon 62443 and 27001. But if you're not regulated and you don't need to be compliant, and depending on your risk tolerance, that's when the NIST CSF is great for having that practice that is has common sense methodology behind it, built on best practices. So a lot of it's going to be down to what industry you're in, what your risk tolerance is, what your budget is, as to whether you adopt a standard or framework.
How is OT cybersecurity any different from what an organization is typically already doing from an IT cybersecurity perspective as far as implementation? How do we justify more of that OT focused approach? I think this is more of just a reiteration of some of your talking points from today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the priorities of OT. So if you are a manufacturer and you're producing product that you are selling to, make money, to be a successful business, you cannot make money unless you're producing, and your business can't function if it has been impacted by a cyber event. If your enterprise space has been impacted by a cyber event, if you've got the right controls and measures in place, your OT can continue to operate and make the money. So, nobody thinks twice about investing in security for IT because it's done all the time. But historically, automation devices, industrial control systems never built with security in mind. But that needs to change because the focus on industrial control systems from a cyber perspective, has increased significantly. So if you want to continue to operate your business and make money and be profitable, then you need to invest in cyber. So leverage the typical business outcomes. People don't think twice about having, well, a lot of companies don't think twice about having a spare part because you can't afford to stop because you've had a processor fail. But if your processor fails because of a cyber incident and you've not taken the adequate protection measures, you're in the same place. So fundamentally, it goes hand in hand with any asset management strategy.
I
So
think
I
the
hope.
last topic, Maria, if we can, there's been a whole flurry of these popping up last minute here, is the really focusing on the asset inventory and the contextualization of how do you even drive risk prioritization within these environments. Maybe you and I can tag team this one, but how do you
Yeah.
even identify which ones to cover, right? So like in OT systems, there's all these different pieces of equipment. Like where do you even start? So I think, Maria, how do you tackle the complexity of the legacy plus new install base and just where even to kick off the first piece of the puzzle here?
Yeah, and I guess it comes down to criticality within your environment. So, I would be thinking about the, I know, say I'm a car manufacturer and I've got all of these different sub-processes where I'm building my car and the different areas of the assembly line. And at the end of the day, they're all going to have to go through a critical part that I know is a bottleneck for me. So, for me, it could be my paint shop. So I would focus on what's critical. So, if I can't get my car bodies through my paint shop, then I can't continue and I can't ship cars. So, every organization is going to have a critical part. Focus on your critical part. What we see when we're doing assessments is that you have these behaviors in certain parts of the plant and they're generally widespread across your entire organization. So you don't necessarily need to have to assess every single part of your plant. Focus on critical and then apply the same learnings and logics for your critical parts of your plant across your organization. And it may be that actually you want to achieve a certain security level for a certain part of your plant rather than your entire organization, and you can absolutely do that as part of your strategy. Stephen, do you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we're seeing is really, to just reiterate some of those points, is you're not going to be able to tackle everything at every point in time, right? So really focusing in and understanding the context of, for your production environment, where are your most critical areas of your assembly? Where are you looking at not only just the assets and the widgets that you're making, but the people and processes to support? Think about the entirety of the resources that go along with this, and then focus in on where you can apply some of the measures Maria talked about today into each of those areas, right? The assessment doesn't just start and end. The assessment continues as you have to make these changes. So I think it's be realistic with yourselves and honest as to what is actually the critical area of your plant. Start there and then continue to prioritize as you make changes.
Absolutely. And then reassess as well, right? An assessment is not a one and done. So be able to go back and assess again and measure your changes and your improvement over time. And that will help you adapt your strategy as well. So don't just assess once and think, yeah, I've done it, because we know that the threat landscape changes all of the time. There's going to be different risks and threats occurring all the time. Your infrastructure will change over time. So, continuously assess and measure where you are against, where you want to be. All right. Unless there's, any more questions, I'm late for my next session, so I'd like to thank everybody for joining today. Much appreciated, great questions, and I hope we've given you some thoughts and some things to help you define your strategy from an OT cyber perspective, and how you can leverage the NIST framework to do that. So thank you very much for your attendance, much appreciated.